Father Ross and I were recently at Spring Education Days for the Diocese. We go up to Carrington every year to the Chieftain Motel, and this year we had a chance to talk about a book from the University of Mary that Monsignor Shea wrote. I think it's called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. We wanted to talk a little bit about that today, and some of the things that we were talking about on our adventure. At least it seems like it's always an adventure. Spring Ed Days is a chance for us to get together. This is a meeting of the priests that isn't required, but it's great for some camaraderie, and usually we pick a topic, or the bishop picks a topic, or the continuing education committee picks a topic that is relevant to the life of a priest in this area. And this year, the topic was this work from Christendom to Apostolic Mission, and to start pondering some of the ways that society has changed in our modern world, and the ways that the church needs to change to meet that demand in society. To think about the things that we're doing. And part of it is the idea that each society or each person has a kind of vision or a worldview, a way that they approach everything else. It's like the background in which objects are situated. For example, you imagine a house, and a house belongs with a family, and there's this whole network of associations with it. And so if you're driving down the neighborhood and you see something, you have a sense of whether it looks like it fits or it's out of place. That's partly because it fits in a kind of world or a kind of worldview. Or this book will use an imaginative vision. And we live in a society that has an imaginative vision. We live in an age of secular materialism, more or less. There's different pieces of it, and it's not necessarily uniform and universal, but this idea that science is how we know things, that knowledge will progress, that humanity is becoming better, that we're improving things, that things are being fixed. We live in a world that is materialistic, which means that a lot of people don't think about the world as having a spiritual component, that it's just what you can see, what you can touch, what you can feel, what you can measure, and that anything beyond that is maybe at best something that could be there, but we shouldn't speak much about it because it's very personal and very individual, and that's at best. At worst, it denies it outright. And this kind of vision or understanding breaks into many different areas in our lives. It doesn't just stay put in thought exercises in academia. It's actually part of the way that we live. And that becomes both an opportunity and problematic. It's an opportunity for the gospel and reaching people because the scriptures and the church also have an imaginative vision, also have a worldview that informs everything else that we do. It's a background in which things are situated. And we've talked a lot about pieces of this in the past at Holy Spirit, the importance of God creating us in love, that the human person is first and foremost foundationally good, but broken. We have an inherent goodness in our creation, that we're loved by God, that we're called into existence, and that's a part of it. But that we also don't do this perfectly, that we get broken, we do things that we shouldn't, we have desires that go in all kinds of directions. The background is also informed by the reality of sin, that things aren't just right or wrong in some kind of obscure moral sense, like what should be done and not be done. It's that they're wrong in a way that damages our relationship with the Creator. They're wrong in a way that damages us as human people, that begins to break down the integration that we have, or that we're meant to have, in a life of grace. And we face this struggle and these battle lines all the time, right? But this is part of a background in which we're meant to see things. The work of redemption, what we just celebrated for Easter, the death of Jesus on the cross, his burial in the tomb, his resurrection from the dead, are also a cornerstone of how we view the world. That we see us not just as good and fallen, but also as redeemed. That God's judgment on the world is first and foremost one of mercy. Jesus prays, Father, forgive them. They know not what they are doing. These kind of things tend not to stay put. And it informs a worldview. It's the way that you see everything. So the person that you pass on the street, maybe they pull out in front of you and you're upset and angry, but they're also a child of God. They're also called to a relationship with Him. They're also invited into the same gift that you have received, whether they know it or not. These kind of worldviews are very different. These kind of imaginative visions the book will use are very different. And we're in the midst of a battle and transition. That things now are changing rapidly. We've seen it in society with many of the changes that are upcoming and the challenges and the questions that people face. What does it mean to be male and female? What does it mean to choose the good? What is good? What is evil? What does it mean to be a person of faith in the world today? Does faith have anything to speak in modern society? There's questions like these that are coming to the surface and bubbling up more and more. And this book breaks down a sense that we've seen a change, we've seen a transition, that we're moving into more of an apostolic age where the gospel and the world that it is speaking to are not friendly toward each other. They're antagonistic. They fight. That the gospel says you are created by God, the world says you are the result and the byproduct of evolution. Christianity says you're created by God for love, to love Him, to live in a certain way, that there is a human nature. And the world's view is basically to accumulate maybe as much pleasure, maybe to do as many good things as you can, and to try and avoid the bad ones, because life is better that way. But it's not a very convincing case. There were ages in the past, the kind of Christendom age, where certain moral teachings, the fabric of society, the way that things worked, was more directed or more helpful for this Christian imaginative vision. You didn't have to fight the battles that we are starting to have to fight now, or that the apostles had to fight in the apostolic age. In the early time of the church, the apostles are preaching to a world that's from the Roman Empire. Rome was pagan, and it wasn't just pagan in the sense that we think of religion, where they had many gods. It was that. But in Rome, religion was also civic. Rome had a civic religion in a sense that this was a civil duty. It was part of being a good citizen, was to practice Roman civil religion. And that practicing civil religion was tied to your place in society. So it didn't quite matter whether you believed it or not, but you had to practice it because that's what a good citizen did. That's what it meant to be part of Rome. And the early apostles are speaking into this. St. Paul and St. Peter, St. Mark, who we just celebrated a few days ago, they're speaking to people who are coming out of this world. And it's a world that Christianity doesn't inhabit easily. Now, over time, Christianity changed. More people embraced it. It became the religion of the empire, and eventually spread somewhat widely around for a while. And then there's barbarians and invasions and a whole history that happens in Western Europe after that. But there were many times and places where the culture was more or less Christian, and more or less helpful for at least instilling some values that are not hostile to the gospel. This isn't the case now. And so one of the challenges we face in the modern world is that a lot of our parishes are sort of structured in a way that's addressing this model of Christendom, or that society isn't against us. And so we have parishes that are kind of about keeping the doors open and doing things to keep the people coming who are coming, or to help them deepen their faith. And that's not a bad way to live. It's not a bad thing for parishes to do. But in the modern world, parishes are much more like an outpost of civilization in the midst of a storm. It's feeling more and more like the gospel is a rescue mission, that we're more and more like Paul preaching to pagan Rome than Saint Bernard of Clairvaux preaching to people in the Middle Ages. It's not just a matter of recalling people to something that they already believe, or pointing out that there's more to belief than just this surface level, that there's a deeper area of belief. Sometimes it's speaking to people coming from a viewpoint and a system, an understanding, an imaginative vision that's entirely alien to the Christian message, or at least that's not conducive to it. We're entering a phase like that, a phase of apostolic mission. And it has some impacts on how we do things and what we do. That our parishes need to become places of witness. You've heard of the new evangelization, and in some ways the conversation that's arising in this book is a result of some of these fits and starts that are happening in different places. It's like we want to evangelize, and we talk about evangelizing, and people are starting to do it slowly, and it's becoming more conscious, but it's not always working, it's not always happening, and part of it is because there's a lot of people that don't come in the doors anymore. There's a lot of people that were Christian and were Catholic at one point and now have left the faith. They no longer practice. Our task is cut out for us, because even this idea of switching to a more apostolic vision, of increasing the strength of our witness, and maybe rearranging and looking at some of the structures that we've had in the past and the ways that parishes have run, the kinds of people that have been hired, to ask, is this really bringing the presence of Christ to the modern world? And if it is, great, let's reinforce it and let's strengthen it. And if it's not, maybe it's time to try something new. These are some of the things that the book is working on and that we talked about as a gathering of priests. The truth is that these are hard questions. There's no easy answer to how you proclaim the gospel to the modern world. There's no easy answer to inviting those that have been a part of Christianity for some time, whether it was short or long, and inviting them back in the door. In some ways, it's almost like they are inoculated against it. They have battle armor against it, because it seems like, it's like, oh yeah, I was there, I did that, it didn't mean very much, I'm just really not interested. Maybe it's a nice thing for you, but I'm in a different place. We have to be ready for that there's a lot of those people in our world, and that's some of the work that has to be done. But at the same time, there's such an opportunity for the gospel, because the modern world, this modern secularism that we're living in the midst of, doesn't have a lot to offer people. We live in a culture of death. John Paul II called it that. And it's death not just in the sense of the life movement and pro-life questions, it is that. But it's death in the sense of the understanding of the human person doesn't bring happiness. You can live the life of the modern world and the culture that we have and discover that it's not really enough, that it doesn't lead to flourishing, that there's got to be more to the story because something about this seems broken. That's exactly what our Spring Ed Days in our seminar was talking about, that we want to address these kind of questions. And the truth is that this is just the beginning. We were there for a day and a half, and there's only so much you can accomplish then. But with a professor from the University of Mary named Dr. Eckelbarger and the other priests of the diocese, I think we began a conversation that will be good. A conversation that will lead in good directions. And some of it is going to impact preaching and how we do things and teaching from that end. Some of it might end up impacting more. Because part of what we have to rediscover and communicate is this imaginative vision or worldview, a context in which we can see the other pieces that we talk about, the other places, the things that are happening in our lives, in which we can put them and see them rightly, see them for what they are, and also allow them to be what they are, not what they aren't. Yes, there are people that struggle in our world today. But the struggle isn't just about evolution and greater awakened consciousness like some kind of New Age thing. The struggle is a person that wants to discover Jesus. A person whose heart is longing for a God who loves them. A person who needs to be cherished and cared for, who can be taught to hear the gospel in a new way, that it's not just teaching and it's not just scripture, it is that, but it also reveals a world where we are blessed beyond measure, where God is leading us and guiding us to where we need to be. That's a beautiful thing. That's something that I want to be a part of, and we don't know where this will end, because you're invited to be a part of it too. This is the beginning of a discussion that will probably continue for some time. And if you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard me say, sometimes we don't know what's going to work. We can plan and plan and plan and try things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And we're often surprised by what works the best. But you just got to shake the coconut tree and see what falls out. And if nothing falls out, then we try something new. That's kind of where we're at. It's beginning a discussion, and an important one, because the ultimate goal is to help reach the modern world with the saving message of Jesus Christ, to invite people into a relationship with Him, into a relationship with the church, a place where all of us, even though we are broken and fallen, can find a home, a place where we find mercy, a place where we find grace, a place where we discover who we are, and where God calls us to be with Him and to go on mission to the people and the culture that surrounds us.